looking at the sky, wondering where I stand. So much on my mind in this crazy land. Estolian faith calling me, echoes in my head. Paris lights they gleam, pulling me instead.
A daughter of Estolia is the name given to any woman who could, in the right circumstances, hold within her the soul of one of the sons of Zacharias. Alcibiades Contraire Zacharion, Capitulo 82.
Max looked around curiously. It was always a culture shock to go from the pastoral simplicity of Estolia to any modern city. Every time he left the island, he was reminded of why he was disinclined to leave it permanently. San Francisco always seemed to emphasize the differences between the two cultures. It was, by far, the most colorful, frenetic, and multifaceted city he had ever visited. He hired a luxury vehicle complete with a driver for the time he planned to be in the city. He had an international driver's license, but driving in San Francisco required more concentration than he wished to devote to getting around. The car pulled to the curb and Max smiled in anticipation. It was 3 years since he last saw his best friend. He told the driver when he would next need him and took his case out of the trunk. He decided to climb the 4 flights of stairs to his friend's apartment, glad to stretch his legs after the long flight from Estolia. His friend was waiting for him with the door open.
Max.
Dwayne's welcome was enthusiastic. The 2 men hugged briefly before Dwayne showed him into the apartment.
How was your flight?
He asked, adding,
Would you like something to drink?
Do you have any of the Daniele I sent you?
Max asked him. Dwayne laughed and said,
I forgot you only drink wine.
He poured himself a drink before opening a cabinet and pulling out a bottle of the golden wine. He uncorked it and poured his friend a glass, before leading him towards an arrangement of chairs in front of the fireplace. After a few minutes of small talk about his flight, Max leaned back in his chair and prompted,
Tell me everything, Dwayne.
I never thought I'd get a beautiful woman to love me,
Dwayne said in an awed voice. Max laughed at that. He felt the muscles across his shoulders begin to relax. He loved his relatives, on both sides of his family, but he did not realize how stressed he was by the pull of differing family loyalties until he was in Dwayne's uncomplicated presence. He had enjoyed the time they spent as roommates, the long debates they had, the discussions about love, marriage, and personal appearance. Dwayne laughingly categorized his own looks as a 10, the ultimate in average. Average face, brown eyes, brown hair, average height, and boring, mediocre build. He believed that men with his looks only got beautiful women by wearing a green suit, Dwayne's unique euphemism for being rich. For Max, appearance was not important. Dwayne assured him that he was only a 5 on the scale of average. He had dark brown, almost black hair, a color that Max cursed because you could see his scalp through the thinning locks. He would have preferred to be ugly instead of average if he could have kept his hair. He was 2 inches taller than his friend and had amber-colored eyes.
So your Penelope is beautiful?
He asked. Dwayne's expression got dreamy.
Max, Pen is gorgeous. I keep expecting to discover it was all a joke. When you meet her tomorrow, you'll see what I mean. Though I do admit she isn't the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. That honor goes to her kid sister, Liar.
You told me her sister was hideous. Or does she have 2 sisters?
I did not meet Liar until after I spoke with you.
Dwayne frowned.
Her parents led me to believe she was a real gargoyle. I'm hoping Pen doesn't agree with her family. They're deluded if they think she's ugly.
I'm sorry I missed the wedding rehearsal.
Max said. He did not really care how beautiful or hideous his friend's future sister-in-law was.
From what I have heard, the Old Night is the ultimate wedding venue in California. What happened to your plans to elope to Las Vegas?
Penn's family planned to throw the wedding bash of the century for their daughter, and that was the price I had to pay to marry her.
Where will you live after the honeymoon?
Max asked.
That, my friend, gave me the courage to marry her. I just got a 3-year assignment to Barcelona, working as an executive for the Galaxy Group. We'll return here for a week after the honeymoon to pack up our stuff and spend more time with her parents before flying out to Spain. I can handle a week with the in-laws if I get 3 years living in a foreign country without them.
Are they really that frightful?
Dwayne picked up his drink and downed the entire thing before grimacing at his friend.
They seemed like ideal in-laws when I first met them. A guy couldn't ask for better.
He snorted before adding,
Then I began to sense there was something weird about them. They told me they had Liar's DNA tested, and they were certain the hospital switched her with another child at birth. They kept talking about how fat she was, with frizzy hair and any number of other genetic flaws. The more they spoke, the more I wondered if she could really be that awful.
I thought you said she was beautiful.
Max said in confusion.
She is. Anyway, enough about me. You were going to explain why you were able to make it to my wedding after all.
My cousin Nico decided to visit an Estolian community in Canada after visiting his brother and sister here in San Francisco. As the future leader of our faith, he will meet with the religious leaders of the region. We are both celebrating our 30th birthdays this month.
Dwayne snapped his fingers.
That's right. I remember when you dated Peyton Villiers back when we played JV baseball. You told me then that you'd never get married before you were 30. I didn't think you'd be able to resist the temptation to marry her.
He whistled at the memory of Max's college girlfriend.
You have a good memory.
Max flushed. He had been tempted, but something held him back. From marrying her, at least.
She is married now.
Max said.
To a Major League Baseball player. She knew I was not serious.
So you flew here with your cousin so you could find yourself a wife?
Dwayne's expression grew thoughtful. Max shrugged.
I do not feel pressured like my cousin. His religious position requires him to marry on his birthday, if possible. I am less anxious. Estolian men marry when they are 30. By that age, most of us are anxious to get on with it, so we always try to find the right woman and have the first of our marriage ceremonies on our 30th birthday. So long as I am still 30 when I marry, that is all that matters.
His cousins on his father's side were not Estolian, and they scorned his Estolian faith. When he spent time with them, they urged him to renounce it. Max didn't know which side of his family would eventually win his allegiance. Dwayne poured himself another drink and brought the bottle of wine over to top off Max's glass. The two men toasted the end of Dwayne's life as a single man, and their conversation drifted to mutual acquaintances. Shortly thereafter, they said goodnight. When Max turned off the light and closed his eyes, the clarity of his thoughts coalesced. He would do everything he could to fulfill his obligations as an Estolian nearing his 30th birthday. He owed it to his ancestors to fulfill his part of the grand bargain that Zacharias made with Deity on the lonely shores of Estolia. The peace infusing his soul confirmed his decision. He would enjoy the blessings that were part of the bargain. As much as he cared for his friend Dwayne, he also pitied him for the shallow, ephemeral imitation of true marriage he would embark upon the next day.
Torn between the stars, faith a-flying fast, heart into wide parts, how long will this last? Prayer of city lights, keeping me awake, both paths in my sight, which road do I take? French family for one, or faith to fill my soul, feeling there's no one to break me out this hole.
Ginger baby girl crying in the night, nurse called a liar, named with spite. Parents felt ashamed, love gone astray. They refused her a name, desperate to throw her away. Liars all alone, lost in a cruel zone.
The capricious nature of the deities in Egyptian culture led me to think of them as merely beings with different powers from those I personally possessed. I have always felt that, were I to meet any of them, I would discover very little difference between immortal divinity and the mortal men I was privileged to associate with throughout my life. How could any deity be more impressive than Zacharias, Zakarian, or Amador? Key: inscription above Pirate's End.
Penelope was as beautiful as a princess. Lyre smiled at her sister, adding her own fawning adulation to that of the principal bridesmaids. It was expected of her. Her position as bridesmaid was a begrudging one, only offered when Dwayne wanted to include one additional groomsman. Lyre did not mind. It was as close to a fairy tale wedding as she would ever come. Once she was in position, she watched the wedding with a cool detachment. She held no illusions about her own chances of having a beautiful high society wedding. To her parents, She was just the unwanted second daughter. They planned 2 offspring, a boy and a girl, but when their second child, Lyre, was another girl, they felt forced to produce Stanley.
Liars all alone, lost in a cool zone.
Once the photographs were taken, Lyre was amused to see a place setting had been arranged for Dwayne's last-minute groomsmen at the top table, but overlooked for her. Her parents would be grateful if she would melt into the background. Lyre slipped out of the reception hall onto the grounds of the old knight. She felt a shameful freedom in skipping the duties of being a bridesmaid. For a while, she walked amidst the grounds, breathing in the heady scents of aromatic herbs planted as borders to the flower beds. She discovered a shaded stone bench and sat down, grateful for the solitude. Closing her eyes, she leaned back and allowed her senses to drink in the exquisite sensory overload of herbs and spices.
Will your sister not need you?
An amused voice asked. She opened her eyes and saw it was the man whose arrival from Europe entailed a need for another bridesmaid. Supposedly, he only arrived late last night, making it impossible to attend the rehearsal or the dinner that followed. She glared a challenge at him.
I dare say your absence is going to cause far more consternation than mine. Didn't you notice the lack of a place setting for me at the upper table?
I did, rather.
He said, his voice rich with a foreign accent.
Though in truth, I thought the mistake was more in your favor than mine. I thought my late arrival meant they did not expect me, so did not lay a place.
She laughed.
You mean the calligraphic placard with your name on it wasn't clear?
He chuckled.
I admit that threw me. But of course I saw that. I considered it an error still. The calligrapher doing the placards could not be expected to understand these family nuances. You are, after all, the sister of the bride, no?
She raised an eyebrow.
I'm amazed you'd know such a detail. Penn is ashamed of me after all.
I'm sorry I did not make it to the rehearsal dinner. I am Maximilian Luc Dumaine.
He said, extending his hand to her.
Please call me Max. I understand you are called Lyre Langham.
She shook his hand, pulling her hand back quickly at the rush of sensation his touch provoked. He studied her face, his own growing serious.
I admit I was surprised when I realized you were my partner.
Why?
Dwayne originally asked me to be his best man, but I could not commit to it. When I told him I could, after all, attend his wedding, he told me this would give his bride the chance to have her unattractive sister as a bridesmaid. I expected you to look more disagreeable than you do, based on the way he spoke of you.
How flattering.
I cannot quite fathom what attributes your family consider flawed. You appear quite beautiful to me.
She felt her cheeks grow hot.
Shall I list all of my shortcomings?
I am excessively curious.
He said, laughing. She stood and began to walk among the herb-fringed pathways.
My biggest failing,
She said as he joined her.
is being a girl. Mother tells me that had they determined my gender properly when she was pregnant, I would have been terminated. Then they might have only had my sister and brother.
I should therefore be grateful to whomever made such an error.
He said. He did not look like he found the topic humorous anymore.
However,
She tried to lighten the mood.
my parents are fond of my sister, and had I been beautiful, I think they would have forgiven me for being a girl instead of a boy. Alas, my second biggest sin is to be born with this truly repulsive red hair. Father once gave me a scientific article that explained it is a genetic imperative built into the human genome to find redheads unattractive. Some people can overcome this natural dislike, and some folks just have no choice. They only have redheads to choose from. But it is natural to find it unattractive, especially when coupled with green eyes.
She waved vaguely towards her eyes, not bothering to mention her mother's frequent commentary that her eyes were also too large, her lashes freakishly long.
I continue to be intrigued.
He urged her to continue.
What other genetic aberrations do your family disparage?
Even if it was as black as my sister's, my hair is frizzy.
She pointed out.
And on top of that, I'm quite short and with thin bones and translucent skin. Mother tells me men don't wish to see a woman's blood vessels. She thinks it's obscene.
She was about to indicate how her wide hips and full breasts made her look obese, when they were interrupted by the irate voice of her father.
Liar! Why the fuck did you bring Maximilian out here? He's needed for the final wedding photos. Your mother and I have been looking for him for the last 20 minutes.
Before she could respond to her father, Max blithely said,
I heard the photographs were going to start, so I came in search of my lovely counterpart.
He smiled at her.
Unfortunately, I was so carried away by the opportunity to spend time with such an exquisitely beautiful woman that I lost track of my errand. I do hope your wife will forgive my tardiness.
Liar could have told him flattering her father regarding her looks would not work. In his mind, an assertion that she was beautiful equated to a personal attack on his integrity. She could see her father was preparing to explode. Unfortunately, Max noticed the gathering storm and tried to defuse the situation. That had never helped before either.
Perhaps my tastes are contrary to most individuals. But to my eyes, your daughter is beautiful.
His eyes met hers as he added softly,
Quite beautiful.
You insult me by calling my perceptions into question. You believe your paltry attempt to pretend you haven't insulted me is sufficient?
Liar winced at the stilted and pretentious words her father used. He looked at Liar with a stormy expression.
I've had it up to here.
He held his hand over his head.
Having people discount my eyesight and intelligence and calling you anything other than the monstrosity that you are. Your mother feels the same.
He looked at the man standing next to her and said with a curl of distaste on his lip,
You're entranced by her looks? Fine. You keep her then. I'm sick to death of having it be known my genetics are responsible for her.
He stormed a few dozen feet away from them before turning back to say,
I don't think we'll need either of you for the last of the wedding photos.
Liars all alone, lost in a cruel zone. Hearts made of stone, liars on their own.
Ginger baby girl, crying in the night. Nurse called a liar, named with spite. Parents felt ashamed, love gone astray. They refused her a name, desperate to throw her away. Lies all alone, lost in a cruel zone. Hearts made of
The extraordinary juxtaposition of forces present during the crises in Hathen and Zalandara and the impact of Tvelok's murder all came together to provide the necessary social impetus that earlier tragedies didn't or couldn't inspire. Social scientists, historians, psychologists, and numerous other students of human behavior believed that the unique combination of events could not have inspired change had even one element failed. Tiernan summarized it perfectly on his 18th birthday. As we watched the dawn from Mount Estoliana, people were tired of inaction, and instead of being led by fear and hatred of others, they turned those emotions to the anger at the inactions of their leaders. They were ripe for change. Leonidas Agamemnon Zakarian, Capitulo 88.
Liar had always suspected the day would arrive when her family would be unwilling to continue to support her. She did not expect it to happen on her sister's wedding day, nor for her father to denounce her so thoroughly to a veritable stranger. Once he disappeared into the building, she crossed over to a bench in the shade of a Japanese maple tree and sank onto it. She tried to wrap her head around the ramifications. Her father's outbursts were usually deadly serious. He could easily mean to treat her like a stranger from this day forth, which meant she would have to call one of her friends.
Your father did not just disown you on the basis of a compliment?
He looked and sounded incredulous. She focused on the man whose unwise words precipitated her crisis.
Don't let it trouble you. My parents did a paternity test. They wanted to prove that I wasn't related to them. They hoped that they would discover that I was somehow switched with some other child at the hospital. I always suspected that he would someday choose to disown me. He hates that my presence constantly reminds him that his genes created me.
Liar? Max. I love Pen. She has two great faults, but I married her today knowing about them. The first is her parents, and the second is believing them when they say you are ugly.
Again, he glanced over his shoulder.
Liar. Whatever your parents have said to you about your looks, I had to tell you it's bullshit. I love Pen, and to me, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, but you are as beautiful as she is.
Max tried to say something, but Dwayne held up a hand and continued.
Max!
He said,
If I'd realized what I was inviting when I asked you to be groomsmen, I wouldn't have done it. But what's done is done. I'd say Liar's possessions will be trashed or even burned before the day is over. You should both leave now. Sorry, buddy. I'll text you once I'm back from my honeymoon.
Dwayne stalked off back towards the building. Liar looked at the handsome foreigner who had turned her life upside down and wondered what he would say or do next.
Liar,
He said slowly.
there is one thing your father said that I agree with. That is, that he gave you into my keeping. I do not take such a charge lightly, especially since mine were the words that so incensed your father that he disowned you.
Please, Max, don't allow his words to trouble you. As I said, I always knew this day would come. It's no big deal. I'll call some friends and they'll loan me a couch or a sleeping bag until I can get a job and save up enough money to get a place of my own.
She frowned and then admitted,
I should have left home as soon as I graduated from high school.
No, I feel as if I am to blame.
He was adamant.
It really isn't your fault.
She pointed out.
Come.
He extended a hand to her.
I believe I know the correct course of action.
Feeling as though there was very little point in objecting, she placed her hand in his. She could at least find out what he had in mind. He led her towards the building. The wedding party and guests were assembling outside as a limousine pulled up next to the entrance. They stopped when the glowing couple came out. Max put an arm around Liar's shoulders and she gratefully leaned against him. Something was reassuring about being held so close by an attractive man, especially in light of her father's blistering attack. Her sister threw her bouquet and it landed in Liar's arms. Their eyes met and Liar was surprised when her sister mouthed, I'll call you. Perhaps she had misjudged her sister and she never really bought into their parents' prejudices after all. Once the limousine pulled away, Max escorted her past the gathered wedding guests. As they walked by her parents, he leaned over and whispered in her ear.
You are beautiful.
Half an hour later, his driver pulled to a halt in front of the Domain International building. She climbed out of the car with his assistance. Looking up at the imposing height of the building, she asked Max,
Why are we here?
My uncle traveled with me to the States so I could attend the wedding and so he could see to a few pressing issues needing his specialized attention. It occurred to me that he is the best person to give us guidance. He is a man whose opinion carries great weight for everyone in my extended family.
He smiled at her as they approached the entrance.
Do you mind if I tell him what has happened and seek his advice on your situation?
Liar shrugged.
I don't really think it matters.
Once they were in the lobby, she stopped and he turned to look at her.
You do realize, Max, there really isn't anything your uncle could say or do that will make my parents take me back. They are very stubborn people. I am now officially disowned.
She grimaced off into the distance, reliving her father's humiliating words.
I don't really want to be reconciled with them anyway,
she said softly. Max grabbed her hands and squeezed them.
I do not believe reconciliation with your family is in your best interests. No. We are here to ask my uncle for his opinion on alternatives for you, ones that do not include your parents whatsoever.
Ginger baby girl, crying in the night. Nurse called a liar, names her with a spite. Parents felt the shame, love gone and lost stray. They cast out a name, desperate to throw away. Liar sings alone, lost in a cruel a confluence of romance, influence of coincidence. Three couples united by Deity, farsighted. Began as a simple trip, three Estolian men seeking the glow of an aura.
As a nation, a religion, and a society, Estolia will never survive if she cannot stand up to close scrutiny. It is critical we work to clarify those beliefs and practices that, from an outside perspective, seem outdated, sexist, and chauvinistic. We must be able to demonstrate our proper place within and as a part of our modern global society. Isaiah Monterey, Zakarian, Capitulo 88.
They rode the elevator to the 27th floor. As the doors opened, Liar looked around curiously. There were only 4 doors leading off the spacious lobby. Max led her to the nearest one and pressed the doorbell. The door was opened by a young man who was extraordinarily handsome, with dark hair and golden eyes, and a serious demeanor at odds with his age. which she guessed was not that much older than her own 20 years. Another, equally handsome man was with him, with golden brown hair and eyes.
Damien, Zeb.
Max said in surprise. He embraced both men, and Lyre enjoyed watching what was obviously a reunion between the three attractive men. Finally, Max turned to Lyre and said,
Damien, Zeb, this is Lyre. Lyre, this is Prince Sebastiani Alexandros Zakarian, but he goes by Zeb.
He pointed to the darker man first and then the blonde.
This is Damien Zakarian. They are my cousins.
Both men hugged her as if she was a relative. Eventually, they moved into a spacious living room. Max settled Lyre next to him. He had assumed a proprietary air around her.
Where are Nico and Uncle Zeke?
He asked. Damien chuckled, earning a sour look from the serious Zeb.
You cannot blame any man for the way he reacts to your sister.
Damien said to him. He turned to Max and answered.
Apparently, Rhea was abducted by some Romeo who thought she was a call girl.
Max frowned and looked from the jovial expression on one cousin's face to the serious expression on the other's.
What am I missing?
Zeb scowled and said,
I actually know him. I'm not sure I care for him becoming my brother-in-law.
He is not in your wealth bracket, cousin. Few people are.
Damien said. He added,
The man involved is Zer Amador.
Amador.
Max exclaimed. Before either man could respond to Max, the door opened and two more men came into the room. The dark-haired younger man looked around the same age as Max, with nearly black hair, dimples, and warm brown eyes. The older man's lighter hair was thinning slightly, but he had a kind demeanor. More remarkable was the way they were dressed. He wore a rich robe of purple and green, heavily embroidered with gold thread. The younger man was wearing a similar, but less elaborate robe with a black sash draped over his right shoulder and fastened at his hip on the opposite side of his body. Max stood and gestured for her to stand as well. He said,
Lyre, this is my uncle Lazarus Ezekiel Zakarian. He is our religious leader and his title is Keeper. Uncle Zeke, this is Lyre Langham.
I am pleased to meet you, young lady. Please call me Zeke.
He took both of her hands and held them for several seconds before giving them a squeeze and saying,
I did not know that my nephew was acquainted with such a charming young woman.
Lyre blushed at the seemingly heartfelt praise.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Lyre, this is my cousin, Zeb's brother, Prince Nicodemus Luciano Zakarian, last resort and first consul to the king of Estolia. Nico, this is Lyre.
Call me Nico. I am rarely called Nicodemus or Prince.
He said with a glare at his cousin. The men all seemed to hold so many titles that she was having trouble keeping track of which names and titles went with which man.
Have you come straight from the wedding?
Zeke asked. Max nodded.
Yes, Lyre and I were partnered in the wedding party.
The two newcomers settled to the remaining empty chairs in the living room. Max changed the subject to ask,
Tell me, uncle, how is Rhea?
The older man glanced at the serious Zeb briefly before he answered,
I knew her pathway in life was going to be rocky, and that she would need my guidance at this time. I believe, however, that the man who has become enchanted by her will treat her right.
Zeb jutted his chin and Lyre could see muscles working in his jaw as his brows drew together. He got to his feet.
Damien and I have to leave,
he said abruptly. Zeke stood.
Of course.
Addressing Lyre, he said,
If you will excuse us.
He and the other two men left the living room. Lyre heard the murmur of voices from the foyer.
Nico, will Rhea be okay?
Max asked the man who remained behind. Nico had a solemn expression on his face, but he nodded.
Yes, Max. Can you imagine any man seeing her aura and not securing her permanently?
Max shook his head.
You are right, of course. She certainly got more than her fair share of good looks.
Zeke returned to the living room and sat down again.
So how can I help you, Maximilian?
He asked. Max grinned, dimples showing on his face.
You are in truth one of the best keepers, uncle.
His smile faded and he said,
I was moved by how beautiful Lyre is. When I met her, I was struck by her beauty. To me, she embodied all the colors of the aurora borealis I expected to find in Canada on my planned trip, a beautiful glow brightening my horizon.
Zeke switched his attention to Lyre, and she felt as if there were layers of the conversation that were beyond her.
Indeed, she is exquisite. It would seem to me that this simplifies your sudden recall to Estolia.
He nodded.
I have no doubts on that score, truly, but I wanted to get your advice on the situation that has developed.
He then proceeded to outline his confrontation with Lyre's father. Zeke listened intently, glancing at Liar from time to time.
I believe it would be best if I had an interview with the young lady. I should be able to help you divine your best path forward. Maximilian, you already know the best possible course for yourself, regardless of the outcome of this conversation.
Max turned to Liar and said,
Would you remain here with my uncle while I take care of a few things? I will not be gone long.
Okay, though eventually I will have to call around to a few of my friends to see if one of them can put me up for the night.
Max and Nico departed, leaving her alone with the affable older man.
Rebellious princess, daughter of the king. Stubborn, spoiled, her brother was visiting. A confluence of romance.
Influence of coincidence, bring couples united, by deity far-sighted. It began as a simple trip, 3 Estolian men seeking.
One man in Hallow's End, whose actions were illegal, immoral, and unethical, had an outsized impact on the project in Hath, the actions of Parody, and the responses of Galaxy. His place in our historical texts cannot be ignored. Meredith Zakarian, History of Estolia.
Zeke's voice and expression were gentle as he said,
First of all, I wish to extend my heartfelt condolences on the loss you must be feeling. Even if you predicted that this may happen someday, it must be quite painful to be disowned so summarily.
She felt as if this man really understood the way her heart and mind were constructed. It was difficult to have her father publicly denounce her. For most of her life, she had tried to get acceptance from her parents, only to fall short in dozens of ways. She had excelled in school, getting straight A's, only to earn her parents' disfavor when the school wanted to place her in the same math class as her older sister. Later, when she tried out for the volleyball team, she was not allowed to play when her sister did not make the cut. She had hoped that her parents might appreciate her for her intellect or her athletic abilities, since their opinion of her looks was well known. When Stanley decided he would take art and music classes, she was even pulled from those subjects, just in case she somehow pulled ahead of her brother in artistic ability. The emotional impact of her father's actions finally hit her. Zeke passed her a handkerchief and waited patiently as her emotions from the day ran their course. When she regained her equilibrium, a sense of peace flooded her system as her tears dried up.
Do you feel better?
I actually do, thank you.
She took a deep breath as she wiped away the last of her tears with the handkerchief. Zeke smiled at her, a little lopsidedly, and asked her,
Would you be interested in visiting Estolia?
I can't really afford it. I don't have much money.
All she had to her name was what was in her purse and bank account, and an unsuitable bridesmaid dress. She did not even have a decent outfit to change into. Her parents had refused to allow her to get a job once she graduated from high school.
Maximilian, having been instrumental in precipitating your crisis, will be most unhappy if he does not know that you are safe and secure. If you come with us to Estolia, he will be able to meet his 2 disparate obligations, to you and to his family.
For how long?
She asked.
The invitation is for the foreseeable future. This will accomplish many things. If after a time you decide you cannot make Estolia your permanent home, we will do what we can to find you a position with Zakarians.
Liar was confused.
For now, it is an invitation to visit. Once you have been in Estolia a month or 2, we can find you a job, either in Estolia or at one of our international offices. It would definitely lead to a permanent position, one way or the other, if that is what you want.
Liar remembered the look on her father's face when he denounced her. This was her opportunity to finally break free from her family. They just might expect her to come begging back to them. It would serve them right if she just fell off the face of the planet for a while.
Maximilian mentioned that your sister will be moving to Barcelona a week after her honeymoon. You would be only an hour away from her by airplane. That will give you the chance to visit with her away from the influence of your parents. Trust me, my dear, you would be welcome. At least promise to visit until the fall.
How would I...
She wondered if she had enough money to buy a basic wardrobe and a ticket to Estolia.
If you are willing to come to Estolia, you would fly back with us tomorrow on our private jet.
She glanced down at the skirt of her dress and said,
I haven't anything to wear.
I think I have the perfect solution to that problem.
He said with a grin.
You are exactly the same size as my wife.
Standing, he extended a hand to her. Once she was on her feet, he looked her over before adding,
Yes, you are definitely her size. I would love your help, my dear. We will go shopping today to get you a small wardrobe, and you can help me select a few things for my wife.
Once she agreed, Zeke led her out of the apartment. They rode the elevator to the 22nd floor. She imagined that they would be going to some sort of exclusive clothing store, but the reality was nothing like her expectations. It was more like packaged chaos than a viable commercial concern. A woman greeted Zeke with a hearty hug when they entered the establishment. While Zeke and the woman spoke in an unfamiliar language, Liar looked around at the kaleidoscope of fabrics and colors decorating every surface of the room. When they finished their conversation, Zeke put an arm around Liar's shoulders to make the introductions.
Liar, this is Brittany Albans. She is a very close friend of our family.
It is wonderful to meet you, Liar.
She said.
I understand you are willing to be a stand-in for Kedarin.
She looked at Zeke and said,
I know exactly what you want. Leave her here and return in about 90 minutes.
The glow of an aura, their Kaylee interest peaking. Confluence of romance, influence of coincidence. Three couples united by deity far-sighted. It began as a simple trip. Three Estolian men seeking.
Deity commanded Zacharias to establish a nation with me. The first night in Estolia would try us. And when he asked me to be his, the whisper.
As a rational man, a scientist who dealt in facts and disparaged anything that could not be proven, I was dubious about the project from the beginning, especially once I realized that not one, but two disparate religions were behind it, supporting it, with vested interests in its success. How could any faith-based organization invest in something so utterly scientific? Would they suppress any data that did not fit their perception of the world? That pivotal moment when I prepared to turn down the chance to take part in it remains to this day one I could never remember clearly. All I know is that I was discussing the project with Michael Othello, planning on turning it down, and the next second, I was not only agreeing to be a part of it, but to lead it and bring Violet with me as my wife. Quinn Sanders, Scientists of the Project, Collected Autobiographies.
Back in the apartment, Zeke knelt to give thanks to Deity for the way Estolians always received guidance when necessary. Some of the pinnacle events of his life flashed through his mind while he communed with Deity. The day his brother almost made him exercise the office of last resort, the time his leg was nearly severed, and the race against time to rescue and claim Kedarin. Now Deity was seeing to the needs of so many of Zacharias' children at one time that it made Zeke more grateful than ever that he was keeper. He was not sure what would happen with Nico, but he was convinced the next time Nico stepped on Estolian soil, his heart and possibly his soul would belong to a woman of strong character. Then there was Maximilian, who had already met his Kaylee, the exquisite Liar. Her rich red hair was quite different from the nearly pure orange red of Kedarin's enticing curls, but still reminded him of her. Zeke's thoughts then shifted to the primary reason he chose to come to California without his wife. Kedarin remained in Estolia to care for Miracle, their youngest child, who had a chest infection. But Rhea needed him to be there for her. He felt the warm sweep of satisfaction. Rhea and Zir would come to Estolia to learn more about the faith. There would be significant challenges in his life after he relinquished the soul of Estolia to Nico. The mastery program he wanted to create was only one of them. Rhea's would be another. In Zeke's Bendelora, he was told that he would live longer than average and be quite vigorous, contributing substantially to Estolia well beyond the expected range of years. Once Nico took on the soul of Estolia, Zeke would embark on the next great adventure. He stood revitalized by the challenges coming his way. The biggest one, leaving Kedarin in Estolia while he traveled to the opposite side of the planet, would soon be over. The marital satisfaction brought to not one, not two, but 3 separate couples made the sacrifice worthwhile. His nephew Zeb would also go to Estolia to be there when Nico returned with the woman who would keep his soul. The end of Zeke's tenure as keeper would be most pleasant. Among his final actions in that role, he would ratify the union of Rhea and Zar and preside over Nico's marriage. The promises of Deity were an integral part of daily life. The intricate way the elements of the tapestry of existence were coming together gave him great joy. His was the satisfaction of knowing how close Deity was to the fabric of their lives. No other society or faith had as productive a relationship with their deity as Estolians. He calculated the hour in Estolia while reaching for his cell phone and sighed once he realized Kedarin would be asleep. He would have to wait until the next day to speak with her. Resigned to waiting, he dialed a different number.
Captain Prescott.
He began when the call went through.
Tomorrow we will be flying home. You can expect 6 passengers. Zeb, myself, Rhea, Maximilian, and 2 others.
He listened to the captain's reply and then asked,
Has the other jet been called to California?
Brittany, while appearing extremely young, was closer to Zeke's age than to Liar's. She was also a chatterbox, bursting with seemingly random questions or bits of information as she worked.
I am from Estolia, the same country as Zeke,
she said while she measured Liar. Frequently, she would call out measurements for her assistant to jot down while she was telling Liar her life history.
Will you be visiting Estolia? It is exciting to create something wonderful for Kedarin, Zeke's wife. He is retiring very soon, and the celebration for his successor is scheduled in the next month. Have you met Nico? He will make a great keeper. Kedarin is an artist. Did you know that?
She never seemed to stop for Liar to answer any questions.
That canvas is one of hers,
she said, pointing to a painting of what looked like the entrance to an ancient Egyptian tomb.
Have you been to Estolia before? My husband and I visited for our son's Bendelora, his blessing at 18. He stayed there for his acolyte year and chose to make it his permanent home. He will be 30 in 12 weeks. Have you met Darin? Zeke and Kedarin had him a month after Trevor was born.
By the time Zeke returned, Liar was in a beautiful yellow and orange dress that complemented her hair. She wondered if Brittany's nonstop chatter would fill her dreams. But since Liar did not have answers to most of her questions, she thought it was good Brittany did not seem to expect any. Zeke bowed to both women and said,
I'm not surprised at the magic you were able to perform on my delightful new friend.
Brittany laughed.
A challenge is not a challenge when the canvas comes to me exquisite to begin with.
I agree.
He smiled at Liar as he tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow.
Will you have everything ready to go by 10 tomorrow morning?
He pushed.
Yes, Kedarin will look extraordinary in the dress I designed for her.
She was silent for several heartbeats before saying tentatively,
I am thinking of leaving my business here to Marcus's youngest sister and my twin daughters who are very happy with their husbands here in the city.
She paused, hesitant, uncertain.
Zeke, do you think it is possible Marcus and I might move to Estolia? Would we be welcome?
She lost most of her color and looked suddenly frightened and vulnerable. Her eyes dropped to her elegant hands and she rubbed them together, scrubbing self-consciously at a few age spots. She was holding her breath. Zeke's answer to this question mattered to Brittany. He crossed the room to take her hands in his. He looked into her eyes, seeming to search them. Finally, into the lengthy silence, he said,
You worry that you are not welcome because of your father. You wonder what you will do when you are there, and you worry about Marcus's feelings after being separated from Estolia these many years.
His expression was gentle. He glanced over at Liar briefly before focusing his full attention back on Brittany. Some emotion flared across his face before he pulled her into his arms, giving her a long, heartfelt hug. When finally, her shoulders slumped and the tension drained out of her frame, he reached up and cupped both sides of her face and then kissed the center of her forehead.
You are not your father, Brittany.
He paused, and Liar thought he was getting as emotional as the older woman.
You have always been welcome in Estolia.
He hugged her again and then stepped back slightly. Taking a deep breath, he said,
While Deity did not make your father do anything, Deity knew I would face a serious impediment that would keep me from the keeper of my soul. At the time, Brittany, I felt as if my entire life, my calling, everything was blighted by this experience.
He stopped and swallowed hard.
It was not?
She asked tentatively, her hand gripping his forearm.
No, Brittany.
He was forceful in what he said.
It is hard for young men to take advice from someone they perceive has had all the blessings promised by Deity given to them without effort. Because everyone knows that Kedarin was abducted, that I was in a race against time to claim her, the citizens of Estolia seem to believe I am much more approachable and believable than I otherwise would be.
But you were so injured. How could you even think of letting me near Kedarin?
Brittany, Kedarin asked me to invite you home to stay. Your son has discovered his Kaylee. He wishes for you and Marcus to be present when he and Denise come out of seclusion.
He pulled a thick envelope out of an inner pocket and pushed it into her hands.
Here is a letter from Kedarin and a formal invitation to both you and Marcus. Kedarin wishes to have your skill and expertise as a dressmaker in Estolia, and I would very much appreciate having Marcus back too. I will be starting a new challenge once I retire, and I wish Marcus to be a part of it.
He stepped back and his voice was brisk when he said,
Thank you again, Brittany. Now Liar and I have a dinner engagement, so we must run.
He took Liar's hand and they left the space briskly. Liar looked back and saw Brittany was clutching the oversized envelope to her heart, her face reflecting hope.
The promises of Deity she forever keep. Our time alive is paradise, but tourism is better after our last final sleep.
This woven way, two souls entwined, an eternal couple by Deity enshrined. Indelible link, one to the other, connected forever in life.
I often wondered, as I inscribed my immortality in the stone, whatever happened to the sailors from the Ankamoon? What were their stories prior to the day that Deity influenced the weather and brought Zacharias and Estoliana to Estolia? Did any of those unlucky men live beyond the wreck? And if they did, what became of them? Or did the deities of Centrarth take as tribute all the souls on board the hapless cargo vessel? Chi, inscription in the Willowall Cave.
They rode the elevator to street level, and then walked half a block, crossed the street, and approached the massive Othello building.
On the 35th floor of the Othello building is Fawcett's, where we will be joining Zeb, Damien, Maximilian, and Nico for dinner,
Zeke said. After they entered the lobby, he stopped Liar and said to her, his voice solemn,
Liar, Brittany may choose not to come to Estolia. I would like to ask you to respect her privacy by not mentioning our discussion this evening. I think she needs to come to a decision before anyone else knows about the offer.
Liar could sense this was important to him. She felt a warmth to be in his confidence.
Of course, Zeke, I appreciate your trust.
A few minutes later, they entered a private dining room. That morning, all she expected of the day was that her sister would marry Dwayne, and that the wedding would be an ordeal for her. Since then, she had been disowned, met several princes, was planning to travel to a foreign country, and was now dining with 5 attractive men. Only after they were served their main meal did Zeke explain the arrangements he had made.
Maximilian, I have asked Nico to spend the next 2 days wrapping up your work here in San Francisco. This will clear your schedule so you can fly home with me tomorrow.
Max set his silverware down and stared at Zeke in shock. He glanced at Liar briefly before returning his attention to Zeke.
Uncle, is that a wise choice?
It is essential,
Zeke said, his voice suddenly steely. Everyone sat in silence, digesting the implications before Zeb said,
You might as well tell us how you have rearranged things for the rest of us.
Zeke's lips twitched as if suppressing a smile.
My exact plan?
He concurred.
I have arranged for the other jet to fly out as soon as possible. Nico will need to go to Los Angeles International Airport to catch his flight to Vancouver. The designate will meet him upon his arrival in Canada. I will give him the details. It will be somewhat inconvenient, but as far as I can tell, it is necessary.
What keeps the new pilot from flying to San Francisco?
Nico asked, irritated. Liar was fascinated by the eddies and undercurrents in the room. Nico was annoyed, while Zeb was solemn and Zeke looked resolute.
With Benzerik married and working on his elder year, we had no choice. The new pilot has a few items of business he must take care of at LAX.
Zeke fixed him with a significant look when he added,
The spirit wishes it to be done in this manner.
The two men were silent for a long time, their eyes locked in a battle of wills, or so it seemed to Liar. When Zeke spoke again, his voice was even more implacable.
You should plan to dress in a suit and tie, rather than wear your robes of office, since you will need to travel by commercial airline to Los Angeles.
Nico's lips tightened. This was the first time Liar noticed interpersonal tensions amongst the five men. They were all alpha males. They would not get along well cooped together for long periods. Each was used to being in charge, and there were subtle power struggles, probably subconscious, that each man engaged in. Zeke was clearly the top dog in this setting. Perhaps it was age and seniority.
What about Rhea?
Nico asked.
If that situation goes the way I believe it will, Zer will realize that he wishes to spend time in Estolia, and they will travel with us tomorrow.
Zeb snorted.
It is far more likely he will want Rhea to declare her Estolian faith a fantasy.
Zeke looked at Zeb, his brow pleated in a frown.
Can you share the source of your animosity, Sebastiani?
It was Zeb's turn to frown before he lifted his chin.
I worry that you so blithely allowed Zer to place his soul within Rhea's keeping when he has...
He paused and glanced at Liar before finishing his statement in their native language.
Betalen voor seks is een standaardpraktijk. Rhea verdient beter.
When Max said something in the same language, Liar thought she would be shut out of the discussion completely. Instead, Zeke held up a hand, commanding quiet. He nodded towards Liar and said,
Forgive us, my dear, for speaking Estolian, especially when we are all quite comfortably bilingual.
Zeke focused his attention on Zeb and said,
Zeb, I understand the source of your specific concern. I should like to ask you to do two things. The first is to examine your own heart. Determine if there are elements of jealousy in your animosity towards Zer. Have honest, open communication with yourself so you can get to the root of your emotional reaction to Zer marrying your sister. I believe he will treat her heart with the same tenderness she will instinctively use on his soul.
What is the second thing?
Zeb asked. His jaw was clenched and he looked remote and forbidding.
When her seclusion is finished, I would ask you to have a similarly frank conversation with Rhea, so you can understand her perspective and why she chose Zer when she knew his history in a most indisputable way, and how he approached intimacy before he met her. I believe that if you are open to her explanation, your heart will be eased.
Am I to travel with you tomorrow also?
Zeb changed the subject to ask.
Yes, I believe it is essential that you return to Estolia. Nico will need you and your parents would enjoy your visit.
I cannot go to Estolia at this time.
Damien said.
I have critical exams coming up.
He looked tormented, as if anticipating a decree coming his way that would be impossible to fulfill or deny. Zeke nodded.
I know, Damien. Your mother wishes you could come home sooner, but we both understand how important this training is for you.
Max spoke then.
What about Liar?
He looked belligerent, as if he would resist any decree that did not include her.
She is coming with us. She will be a great help for Rhea, or Rhea will be a great help for her. I am not sure which way it really goes,
Zeke said.
In any case, we will be quite the group returning to Estolia. Myself, Liar, Rhea, Zer, Maximilian, and Zeb.
I don't have to go if it isn't convenient,
Liar said.
You really aren't responsible for my troubles,
she added, looking at Max. He shook his head.
I meant, Liar, that I will not leave without you.
He smiled at her as they approached the entrance. He smiled at her.
It is settled then.
Zeke said.
Nico, you and I will return to Zare's apartment in the morning and we will let him know of our decision. For tonight, it is probably best if Nico and Max stay with you, Zeb. Lyre can stay with me.
You don't mind?
Lyre asked.
No, my dear.
Zeke said.
I would be most pleased to have you remain with me. I shall feel less homesick for my children and my wife.
A confluence of romance, influence of coincidence. Three couples united by deity, far-sighted. Began as a simple trip, three Estolian men seeking the glow of an aura, their Kaylee interest peaking.
The keeper of the soul of Estolia is the only son of Zacharias given the privilege and the burden of keeping the soul of another. On the seventh day, like all other couples, the marriage of the future keeper and his Kaylee is confirmed by the Spirit. It is the eighth day that is so critical to the couple and to the nation. The day after their marriage is ratified, he is confirmed as the newest keeper, and during the ceremony, his Kaylee yields up her soul to him, just as he yielded his to her when they consummated their union. This is when each Estolian gives a particle of their soul and places it within the safekeeping of the couple. Together, these two are the key to the stability of Estolia and thus the happiness of her citizens. Kytheros, adieu for keepers.
Max leaned back against a pillow, thinking about the exquisite woman who had stunned him when he saw her walking down the aisle. His gut-level reaction had been an overwhelming triumph, followed by insecurity. Why would a woman with so much going for her bother with him? He was not attractive, with more of his scalp showing through his receding hairline than he liked, and she was supermodel beautiful. He sighed heavily.
You have it bad,
Nico said. Max grinned as he rolled onto his side to look at Nico.
Yes, I do. She is beautiful.
As beautiful as Rhea.
Nico concurred.
Not that Lyre knows it, though.
True.
Max shuddered at the memory of her family's cruelty.
Her family have called her a hideous gargoyle her whole life. Can you imagine?
It is 18 days before your birthday.
Nico reminded him.
I wonder why Uncle Zeke wants you to be around her.
You should know. You will take over as keeper if your blessing is correct the day before my birthday.
Coincidence?
Nico said.
I think not.
He was silent for a time before adding.
For some men, the temptation is more than their character can handle, but for other men, it can be resisted, and sometimes the test of character is the critical point. Max, I would say that you are fully capable of holding back until it is the right time. Perhaps Uncle Zeke just wants to be sure you do consummate your relationship on the appropriate day.
I feel a great peace, Nico, to know that you are the one who will keep the soul of Estolia. I could not do it.
Max said. He reflected, not for the first time, on how blessed ordinary Estolians were when compared to the burdens borne by the leading class. He himself benefited from everything they did to keep him happy, healthy, and safe, and he was asked to contribute very little in return. He served 1 year as an acolyte, doing his service jobs without complaint. The recompense offered was a scholarship that paid for 4 years at Harvard. He did work for the Zakarian Corporation, making sure the interests of Estolia were always supported, but he traveled in luxury and knew from his travels and studies that the average Estolian lived very well compared to people in other nations. He sighed in contentment.
It is wonderful to be Estolian.
Easy enough for you to say. You have found your Kaylee. You have only to wait, and she will be yours.
Nico sounded frustrated.
I have yet to see a single woman who even sparks my imagination.
You will find her, cousin, I am certain of it. When you do find her, you will feel like you have been hit by a flock of willow-wills.
I am looking forward to being hit by a flock of birds, even flying overhead if that is what it takes.
Nico said, a smile in his voice, his good humor restored. Both men grinned at the messy image Nico's interpretation called up.
So,
Max asked after a pause.
What is going on with Zeb?
Nico got to his feet and started to pull off the clothing from the day.
Imagine how it feels to be Zeb. son of the former king and brother of the current king and of the last resort. His blessing at 18 says that he will never experience an aura, never place his soul in the keeping of his wife. If his blessing is taken literally, he will agree to marry her before he has even met her. Now Zeb is surrounded by the promise of 3 separate unions all going right, while he knows he will have to willingly forego the blessings promised so freely to others by Deity.
Nico stopped speaking and shook his head sadly. In the silence, Max thought about the prophecy made nearly 8 years before Zeb was born, saying that the 3rd son of Queen Lelaine would be a catalyst of change and save the planet. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to be born under the shadow of a prophecy like that. Nico continued.
When he looks at Zera, he sees himself, except Zer now has more than Zeb can ever expect to have. As an Amidor, he has the name of a son of Zacharias. His first name even begins with Zed. In addition, Zir, while not being in the same wealth bracket as Zeb, is still affluent. Zer has also been granted that which Zeb must forego, a mate confirmed by Deity through an aura. Zeb has years before he will be given the most superficial of connections, much less than you or I will have. This has brought home to him all that he will be asked to sacrifice for Estolia. Zeb sees Zir as undeserving of the many blessings he will so effortlessly receive.
Max suddenly felt ashamed of his own good fortune in finding Liar. Zeb would never enjoy the same blessings. He vowed at once to be true to the promise of Zacharias and resist temptation until the time was right. Not only for himself but for Zeb, who deserved the blessings Max would reap, but would be denied them in the fulfillment of his prophesied role.
You will find a lovely Canadian beauty, though,
Max said,
who will love you to distraction and fulfill your birth blessing.
Confluence of romance, influence of coincidence, 3 couples united by Deity, far-sighted. We dream in colors unseen. Hope blooms where shadows lead.
Over the capitulos, keepers added a series of exercises for acolytes to the repertoire devised by Amador. Most were designed to lead the young men to a gentle understanding of their social system, obligations, rewards, and provide guidance to help them navigate the normal obstacles of youth. Meredith Zakarian, History of Estolia.
Liar lay awake in Zeke's guest room, staring at the ceiling. The one thing that influenced her acceptance of the invitation to visit Estolia was Maximilian. She whispered his name out loud several times, hearing the syllables with pleasure. He was very good-looking with soulful eyes. He was a beautiful work of art. Did he really think she was beautiful? Was she in an alternate reality where ugly was beautiful, and men like Max might actually be attracted to women like her? Would Max ever want to marry her? Impossible. And yet, she smiled and lay back down, deciding to indulge the fantasy.
Harmony in silent night, peace glows in faded light.
The next morning, she woke to the sound of movement in her room. After a momentary alarm, she realized it was Brittany, whom she had met the previous day.
Good morning, chickadee,
she said to Liar. Then she giggled.
But you are not named after a modest songbird, are you? You are named after the more exotic lyre bird.
How did you know? Most people think I'm named after the musical instrument.
Liar said. Brittany tilted her head to the side and said,
I thought from when I met you that you seemed more like the bird than the instrument.
After my mother gave birth,
Liar said dryly.
The nurse held me out to my mother, and she said to her, "Here's your beautiful redhead daughter. What will you name her?" Mother was so shocked I wasn't the dark-haired son she expected that she called the nurse a liar. The nurse had seen a production of The Lyre Bird the previous day, so she misunderstood, believing my mother meant me to be Liar. My parents never bothered to make any sort of correction, so I became Liar.
She still had the video of the confrontation between the nurse and her mother. The nurse sent Liar a birthday card each year. Brittany laughed at the story.
The one thing we are never given a choice about in this life is who our parents are.
She shook her head before adding,
My father spurned his religion and opted to marry when he was 21 years old. Mother died when I was 5. He never looked at another woman for the rest of his life. He focused all of his attention on me to the exclusion of anything else. Then he decided I wanted to marry Zeke.
While she spoke, she pulled a chair up to the side of Liar's bed.
So when Zeke fell in love with Kedarin, father kidnapped her and tried to force Zeke to marry me instead. I did not know anything about it until almost 3 weeks later. I was on my honeymoon. He refused to acknowledge Marcus as my husband until I told him he had 2 choices. He could accept my choice of husband, or he could say goodbye to me. He eventually came around. But it is pretty appalling when you know your father has done something so horrible.
Liar didn't know why this woman was in her bedroom.
Why am I here?
Brittany finished her question.
I brought your clothing with me and some suitcases and a few other things.
She gestured to a set of luggage.
I packed everything for you, but wanted to help you select the outfit you would wear for the trip to Estolia.
She pointed to a beautiful gauzy pantsuit draped on the foot of the bed.
That should be comfortable to travel in.
Should she ask Brittany about the invitation to move to Estolia? She did not want to pry, but Brittany's confession about her father explained much of the conversation she overheard the prior day. As if reading her mind, Brittany said,
My husband and I have decided to move to Estolia Liar, but it will take us a few months to wrap up our affairs here. Estolia is utterly different from San Francisco. You will like it.
She flushed slightly.
It was knowing that you knew I received the invitation that gave me the courage to accept it.
Hearts in union, side by side.
Nico greeted Zeke outside the Carpathia building.
Are you sure you know what you are doing?
Nico asked him.
There is something deeply significant going on here. As such, it behooves us to facilitate the situation and enhance that which Deity has proclaimed.
And of all of this, none of it is toward my own pressing need.
Never fear
Zeke said to him,
that your needs are ignored. Your leadership of Estolia is dependent on having a very strong woman to keep your soul. I am certain you will meet her here or in Canada.
Nico had a sudden flash of insight. Somehow, before he reached Canada, he would discover the keeper of his soul. He knew it as sure as he knew his own destiny. Zeke reminded him.
For now, we must focus on the needs of your sister.
Inside the Carpathia building, the elevator swiftly took them to the penthouse. When Nico saw the shining look of happiness on Ria's face, he was grateful that he had the courage to leave her with Zerer.
Uncle Zeke,
She said hesitantly.
I wanted to know if it was possible for the 2 of us to travel to Estolia.
Of course, Ria. In fact, I was hoping you would consent to come with us today in the corporate jet. We will be leaving in a few hours.
Who else is going?
She asked.
Nico has other obligations.
Zer said.
But Zeb, Maximilian, and Liar will be traveling with us.
Who is Liar?
Ria asked.
A woman Max met at the wedding where he was one of the groomsmen. She about knocked him off his feet with her aura.
Zeke said. He added teasingly.
She will compete with you for the title of most beautiful woman in the world.
I doubt it is possible.
Zer said.
For any woman on this planet to be more beautiful than my Ria.
Zer was lost in the vision of the woman who had taken his soul. Zeke said with humor.
I do not think anyone is more beautiful than my Kaylee. But that will always be a point of debate through the ages.
He looked at Zer.
Will you be ready and able to leave in about an hour and a half?
He nodded.
I can easily travel, so long as I am able to connect to the wider world.
Once you have spent a week in seclusion with Ria, you will start a year of study that I will facilitate.
Zeke pulled a card out of his pocket and added.
Have your driver bring you to Smith Airfield at this address. We will try to leave no later than noon.
Zer glanced at his wristwatch and said.
We will see you in 90 minutes.
Nico embraced his sister.
I will see you soon, Ria.
He told her as he and Zeke departed.
New hope in whispers flow. From the dark a light will spring. Broken hearts begin to sing. Parents felt ashamed, love gone astray. They refused her a name, desperate to throw her away. Liars all alone, lost in a cruel zone.
While the two royal seclusion suites in the temple were constructed with the idea of being used by the heir apparent and his brothers, it became common practice to allow any newly united couple to use the suite if it was not needed. There were 4 other seclusion suites created at the time of Tremaine and Antiochus, so that up to 6 couples could conceivably be in seclusion simultaneously. In addition, it is common for Estolians in other countries to create their own unique seclusion space. It is the time set apart that is uniquely critical, not the specific locale. Cadaro Alfonso Zakarian, Capizziulo 80.
Liar felt peculiar, choosing to go to a foreign country with someone she barely knew. But Max had brought home to her just how lost and alone she was without her family's support, such as it had been. In retrospect, she could not figure out why she had lived by their edicts for so long. Perhaps there was a part of her that hoped to earn their love if she was willing to do as they asked. She had to do something with her life, and right now she had no direction or purpose. Flying off to a new land seemed as good as anything else. She would, at the very least, be near Penn, and she could take the time to get to know her sister outside the stifling atmosphere of the house they had grown up in. Voices brought her out of her reverie. Ria, who was scheduled to travel with them to Estolia, was arriving. Ria had the same wine-red hair and was the same height and build. The only difference was the color of their eyes. Ria had amber cat's eyes compared to Liar's green ones. In fact, the two could almost have been twins. They were that similar. Ria's hair was wavy instead of Liar's tight curls, but they both wore it long. As Ria entered the airplane, she stopped at the sight of Liar. She rapidly took in her hair, eyes, and build, then smiled and came forward.
You must be Liar,
she said. A brilliant smile graced her face.
My brother said you were beautiful. He did not tell me we look so much alike.
Zeke and Zaire joined them, with Zeb just behind. Max brought up the rear. Zeke stepped up to Liar and turned to Ria, saying,
Ria, Zaire, I would like to introduce you to Liar Langham. Liar, this is my niece, Rhiannon Zakarian, and her fiancé, Zaire Amador.
During the flight to Estolia, Liar and Ria became, if it was possible to characterize it in that way, twins of the heart and soul, as well as twins in appearance.
Aren't amber eyes a strange combination with red hair?
Liar asked, thinking back to the article her father demanded she read. She remembered that it had all kinds of genetic information she had trouble following.
The most intriguing part of our heritage,
Ria said, gesturing to her brother and herself,
is that we all ended up with amber eyes. Father has grey eyes and dark hair, and mother has red hair and green eyes. Grandmother had the most luxurious dark brown hair, but all of us kids inherited her eye colour.
Her expression changed from light-hearted to sad.
She died last year. She lived a full life, but it is difficult to be without her.
She saw Tiernan born.
Zeb pointed out softly, squeezing her shoulder in sympathy. He looked over to Liar and said,
Tiernan is our nephew.
Do all Estolians have large families?
Liar asked. She yearned for a large family for herself. If her parents had more than the 3 children, one of them might have championed her, taken her side, and cared what happened to her.
I have an older brother, Eduardo, and a younger sister, Annie.
Max said.
Most of the families in Estolia have 2 or 3 children.
Must one ascribe to your faith to live in Estolia?
Zaire asked Zeke. Liar was curious about that too. She was so comfortable with Zeke that she forgot he was a religious leader. Zeke answered,
To visit Estolia, you are not required to be a believer. We would not, however, encourage anyone to make plans to live in Estolia for their entire lives if they did not plan to become a member of our faith.
So for Ria and myself.
Zaire began.
You and Ria will remain with us for a full year.
Zeke said.
During the year, you will learn about our religion and history, and at the end of the year, decide whether you wish to live the faith or not. Nobody will pressure you into it. Ria will always be with you, no matter what you choose. If you are not comfortable with the faith, Zira, the 2 of you will prefer living away from Estolia.
Liar was watching Ria's face while Zeke was speaking and wondered if what he said was true. From Ria's expression, it seemed unlikely that she would prefer to live anywhere else, despite what her uncle said. Liar's thoughts then shifted to what would happen in her future. Zeke must have seen the question on her face. He said,
And you, Liar, I want you to know that, while your situation is slightly different, you are still here under a similar understanding. We would like you to consider Estolia your home always, but once you have your feet under you, if you find it is not a comfortable place, you can leave. We plan to help you establish yourself in life, Liar, in whatever way works for you.
Aside from all that, I would love it if you would be willing to stick around for my wedding.
Ria said. She blushed and looked at her uncle.
In 6 days?
Zeke's smile became quite broad at that.
Yes, today is the first day. Not as secluded as I would recommend, but certainly still the first day. I have asked that the royal seclusion suite be prepared for your arrival. Nico will likely be back here a week before his birthday, and I have a sense he will need your influence in the days leading up to it.
He turned from Ria to Liar.
He will need you as well, Liar, in some way.
She frowned, glancing at Max uncertainly.
You don't think...
She began, wondering if Zeke somehow thought she was keen on Nico.
I believe, Liar, that Nico will meet the woman who will be the love of his life in the next day or two, but she will need to know she is making the right choice in accepting him. Speaking with you and Ria will help her decide.
We will only be out of seclusion a day before his birthday,
Ria observed.
Time enough,
Zeke said.
Just as Nico will be out of seclusion only the day before our next ceremony.
Everyone was quiet for a short time. Liar was fascinated by the nuances of the conversation. Zeke spoke about Nico meeting the love of his life as if it was a foregone conclusion. But how could he know? Liar looked at Max as she thought about anyone meeting the love of their life.
How are you doing, Liar?
Max asked her. She glanced at Ria, whose attention was centered on Zir to the exclusion of everything else.
I'm okay. What work do you do, Max?
She asked.
Zeke told me you worked in the international offices, but that you were recalled to Estolia suddenly.
Max glanced at his uncle and then looked back at her.
Yes, I was working as a liaison in various business offices. I have some relatives in France, and they have had me working on the board of directors of Domain International, but the job will soon be taken over by my older brother, Eduardo. He has a better head for business than I have anyway, and he is moving to France with his wife.
What will you do in Estolia?
I will continue to be a liaison for various business interests. I might also work with Nico for a year after he returns. There are a lot of unknowns. I will not really know until the next month is over.
What is happening in the next month?
Estolia is a dual monarchy and theocracy, with the responsibilities of leadership shared between the king and the leader of the faith. When the heir apparent turns 30, he marries, and 7 days after his first child is born, he is coronated. The time between the birthday of the heir apparent and when the next leader of the faith is married is termed the transition.
And the new king has been coronated already?
She guessed. Max nodded, relaxing back in his seat before clarifying.
Nico is in line to be the next leader of the religion. He cannot take it over until he is married. In our faith, a man marries when he is 30.
Aren't you the same age as Nico?
He nodded again.
For the top positions of leadership, it is considered critical to try to marry as close to one's birthday as possible. For average people like me, it is not that critical, so long as I am married in the next year and 17 days.
What will I do in Estolia?
She asked. Zeke answered her question.
First of all, you will be an honored and treasured guest for the final festivities in our transition. This round anyway. They will last until 8 days after Nico's birthday. There are a few other things that might take place in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So let us say it will be a month full of exciting events. Afterward, Ria has an idea she wants to work on. She might want an assistant, and you would be perfect for the job. At the end of the year, Zer and Ria will decide if they want to make their home permanently in Estolia, and you can use that as the time for you to decide as well.
Ria was apparently not as deeply involved in her whispered conversation with Zer as Lear thought, because she turned when her name was mentioned. With a squeal of delight, she launched herself into her uncle's arms.
Do you really mean it, Uncle?
She asked.
I do, Ria.
He was solemn.
You have demonstrated a critical need in Estolia. You must be involved in designing a system to address the issue. I believe...
His expression became concerned, his features drawn as he glanced toward Zeb.
We are going to experience some extraordinary events before I fully retire from active participation in the leadership. We must be prepared, as a nation, to face them from a position of strength.
While Zeke and Rhea went on to discuss her idea, Lyre tuned them out. She felt an easing of tension. No matter how or why she had ended up traveling to this foreign country, these people had employment for her, and she had a feeling that they would help her find herself.
Her world turned cold, life's bitter test. Junked her fit sold, she did her best.